This is Voices of Adoption, and I'm Janet Sherland. I'm the author of Abandoned at Birth, a memoir about the trauma of the adoptee experience. I'm talking with experts and adoptees about the ways in which adoption shapes our lives. Today, I'm excited to introduce Vinnie Vinzetta. Vinnie is a sports multimedia journalist and anchor for KENS 5 in San Antonio, Texas. He joined the KENS 5 sports team in July of 2011. His previous 6 years were spent at KENS 5's sister station, KMSB, in Tucson, Arizona, where he was the sports director. He is an adoptee and president of the board of Adoption Priorities. I had the pleasure of speaking on Vinnie's show, and we connected over our shared experience as adoptees. Welcome, Vinnie. What would you like the listeners to know about you and your story?
Well, Janet, first of all, it's great to be with you again. Congratulations on all the success with your book and this show. You're a living testament to us all who have a connection to the adoption world. But my personal, Janet, is that I was the youngest of six and the only child that was placed for adoption by my birth mother. My adoptive parents couldn't conceive naturally, and my adoptive grandmother was a social worker for the Department of Human Services in Oklahoma, and one of her clients was my birth mother, Marilyn, who came to her one day and said, well, I'm pregnant with number six. We're living on welfare. I don't know what to do. Maybe aborting is an option, but I'm not sure how to handle this. And my adoptive grandmother, Susie, said, well, I have a daughter and a son-in-law who can't conceive and they would like to adopt. Are you open to that? And very much, thank goodness, Marilyn was. And so the Zetta family attorney got involved and the paperwork was drawn up and all the legal proceedings and processes were carried through and the adoption was finalized. And I left the hospital 3 days, I believe, after my birth with the Vinzetta family. And my father, my adoptive father, always swore this was a true story. He told me this, that upon my birth, the nurses in the maternity ward began to work on Marilyn. And they said, you don't need to do this. And this was in 1973. They said, you don't need to do this. Single mothers in this country do this all the time. You can survive. You can raise this baby. You don't have to place this baby for adoption. And so goes the story. In the meantime, the word gets out to the hospital halls to the Vinzetta family attorney who was there to collect me. He starts working his way up and down the hospital halls. I have all this legal paperwork. This child's supposed to leave with me. What's happening here? And at some point, the delivery doctor cornered him and said, look, I understand what's happening here, but if this woman changes her mind, baby's going to stay right where he is. Well, they said in the end, she asked to spend like 45 minutes of private time with me, handed me over to the nurses in the maternity ward, gave them $5 and said, tell them to buy something nice for the baby. And off I went. And my adoptive mother says when she got word, she was at the lake in Oklahoma and she began running up and down the beach screaming, I'm a mom, I'm a mom. So that was how my adoption story started. At 18 years old, I began to start my search to find them. And that was a long, long journey, but finally made the finish line.
That story speaks to so many issues of the adoption constellation. I mean, it's mind-boggling. I mean, the pressure on a woman delivering and making that decision or that final decision and having all those forces at her when she's in no position to think clearly or fully. The attorney in the hall, the nurses speaking to her. She'd already had 5 other children. You're given to the adoptive parents, decided 18 to search. I don't even know where to begin. There's so many questions that I have. But how was your youth? Did you know you were adopted? How open was that? How much did you talk about it? And what led you to actually starting a search when you were 18?
So, as you know, Janet, back in those days, they were private, closed adoptions. My parents were very much open that aspect of my life. They did sit me down and my sister both and said, you may notice that you don't look entirely like your mother and father. So here's kind of your background. They were very open. And I recall the first time I ever heard my mother's voice. My birth mother, Marilyn, took opera lessons of all things. She had a mission, a dream, a goal in life of becoming an opera singer. And sadly, she really spent every last waking dollar she had on that. And she wasn't the best mother to my five other siblings. But I circle back to say that my adoptive grandmother had a tape of Marilyn at opera lessons. And that was the first connection to her, was hearing her practice opera at a lesson one day. So that was really my first kind of life interaction.
That make you feel when you heard that? Did you have a reaction to it?
Yeah, as much as an 8, 9, 10-year-old can have, it was very moving to hear something that was right there, but yet still so far away. Like I couldn't reach out and touch or grab, but I could have that sensation of hearing her. So it was very moving and cool for a child to hear that. But when I was growing up, I'll be very honest, being adopted in a small town lakeside community in Oklahoma, very, very small town, being adopted, I was kind of the cool kid, if I'm being honest. No one else in our community had any story or connection like that. And it was just always a neat facet in my life. As I got a little bit older and into high school, I began to learn that I was the youngest of six. And there was a 6-year gap between myself and the fifth. And I was getting more and more curious. And I wanted to know, as much as I knew who I was and who had raised me and reared me, I also really didn't know who I was. I knew that there was something else out there that I wanted to find out about. So that really sparked my curiosity to start my search. And I called my adoptive grandmother one afternoon when I was a senior in high school, and I began to ask questions about who I really was and what she knew. And the conversation was going okay until at one point she said, "Do you want out of this family?" And that was an upsetting moment. And I said, "Grandma, I got to go." Okay, I got to go. So I hang up and I call mom, and I'm crying. I'm upset. And she said, "Let's exhale. Let's take a deep breath. I'll talk to your grandmother and we'll get this squared away." So she did talk to grandma. And when we all sat down, and she said, "I'm sorry. It's not a picture perfect family. There are things, there's stuff in that family. And I was just worried about you finding out some of these difficult things about who your birth mother was." But in the end, they did support and gave me initial information, which was their names. So that's the initial steps I had, the initial information. And the first step I took was when I was a freshman in college, and I went to the city court in Oklahoma City to have my birth records unsealed. And I would tell you, Janet, that this is one of the more young, empowering moments of my life. I'll never forget. I've written about this in my book, Finding Them. I'll never forget standing in the judge's chambers, and he asked me why I wanted to do this. I began explaining my circumstances, and as I was talking, he began to shake his head no, because it's real easy in this world, as you know, to keep those things sealed. In that moment, as I was stumbling and fumbling my way through as a freshman in college why I wanted my records unsealed and him shaking his head no, something overcame me, and I really just started to talk from the heart and got emotional. And God bless that man. That judge, in the end, he's the one who changed my life really forever. He agreed to have my birth records unsealed. A few weeks later, receiving those records in the mail and unsealing them and opening them was really emotional. That was really emotional, to see a birth certificate that said baby boy Carol, to see her name, Marilyn Carroll, to see where it said illegitimate child and the father's name was not listed. All that was very emotional. That was a very emotionally charged day that day.
Again, you're speaking to so many of the issues, but I think, as you said, it's so hard for people to appreciate that even in a happy home and a happy adoptive situation, there's still this human drive in us to find out who we really are. It's not about love, and it's not always about rejecting one family and then your grandmother's worry or insecurity, that your curiosity and your need to know yourself was a reflection of your love or loyalty to your adoptive family. And they're two separate things. Finding out who we are and where we came from is so different than loving and being loyal to a fine adoptive family. And then as you face that insecurity, that adoptive family insecurity of, oh, you're going to leave us, you're going to go to this other family. And again, it's not one or the other. It's that we are part of both, and we need both of those things. And then for you to have to stand in front of a judge and have someone be the man that's going to decide your fate, that this the stranger sitting there is going to decide whether you can know who you are or not. It's just so powerful. And you rose on that occasion to speak from the heart and move this other human being to give you access to that and understand that it really was something deeply felt by you. And then the power of any human being looking at official records to see that they were once somebody else. I know I had that same experience when I looked at my official adoption file. It's shocking to think that we once held another legal identity, that we were born to be somebody else than who we were raised to be. It's a very profound experience and kind of mind-boggling. And you said that was so deeply moving to you. How did you absorb all that into your life at that point?
I had to understand, Janet, the emotions of why did you throw me away, and come to terms that she didn't throw me away, even though when I was young and immature, I thought, why me? There were five others you kept. I've learned a lot since then, and have visited with my oldest birth sister, Noelle, many, many times, who I'm very close to. And she said, it wasn't a situation of throwing you away. Marilyn did not believe in abortion, and she wanted to give you a shot. She wanted to give you an opportunity. But she also said, I'm so relieved that you didn't discover us until you did, because my heart just tells me that she would have rejected you because of her decision. She would not have wanted to see you. And that really resonated with me. She said, I just didn't want you to deal with the pain and the sorrow of finding us when she was still alive, and then one of us having to tell you that she didn't want to see you. Or you finding her and her messaging you or telling you, don't contact me, I don't want to see you. So I guess I'm relieved that the discovery didn't happen until she had passed away, because I'm not sure I would have known, even as a mature adult, how to process the emotion of her saying, I don't want to have any contact with you. That would have been really, really, really difficult. I came to understand that she placed me. I used to say she gave me up for adoption, gave me up. But I later learned that she placed me for adoption is the proper verbiage to use. So to answer your question, there was processing emotions of why all this happened, because as you stated so eloquently, everybody has a right to know their birthright. Like, there was a whole other group of people out there. I would wake up every morning and say, there are five other brothers and sisters out there. I want to know who these people are. I have a right to know who they are. And luckily, all these years later, since the discovery in 2011, they've all embraced me.
You're full biological siblings, right? You're all same mother, same father.
My oldest brother, Sean, has a father. The middle four have a father. And then there is no information about who my father is. So I've asked around over the years, and some have said, was it no other way to say it, was it a one night stand? Was he in the penal system? For whatever reason, they chose not to put his name on the paperwork. So my sister Noelle thinks that there's a chance that my father could be one of her music teachers, but that's a best guess. So my running joke over the years when I've spoke about adoption has been, we don't know anything about my father, but whoever he was a good looking guy.
That's great. Have you ever considered subscribing to one of the DNA websites and seeing if you find any of your fraternal relatives?
I have considered that. I haven't taken steps. Maybe this conversation will put me over the fence, and maybe I will do that, because I think if it can be solved that way, I would like to know maybe who my father was. I doubt he's still with us, but at least an answer. And the answer is yes, I should take that step.
Well, it's interesting. Of course, a lot of people who are donor conceived individuals, conceived through sperm donation, have really organized now to say it's not enough just to know our mothers. We need to know more about our fathers. We don't need this man to parent us, but we need to know more than he was sperm donor 1, 2, 3. We need to know what his family was about, what he was about, the interests. And for those of us that knew nothing, you think, well, knowing something is great. But I think ultimately it shows that for human beings that need to know all of us, all the pieces of us, to really be able to center ourselves and integrate ourselves and become healthy, integrated individuals is just a very primal and very foundational drive.
Yeah, I agree. It's been really overwhelming with my mother's side and all the siblings, and then I get lost in life and a very busy career. But to your point, I do need to make that a priority. That's something I should do, and I will do.
This is such a long process. It's not something that happens in a matter of weeks or months or even years. I find that I continue to process the information I've learned about myself and who I am and the adopted me and the biological me, and just sort of learning to accept and live with the trauma that adoption actually, even though I had a perfectly fine adoption, it's still traumatic to have been so separated and severed from my authentic identity and all my heritage. And I'm continue to be amazed that this is really a lifelong journey. Like you said, each thing in its time. You have a lot to process with the siblings that you found and all this. And then when you're ready, you'll take another step.
I have to say, I really hadn't ever considered the trauma that I had gone through until our previous interview, where we talked about your experience and your book. So you really, Janet, opened my eyes to understanding that even though I've taken the positive and just tried to roll forward with life, yes, there was trauma that I have endured. And I have thought a lot about that since our first interview and since I first met you and thumbing through your book. Yes, I've come to understand more and more that I have suffered some of that. And it's okay to talk about it and express that. And my sisters, Noelle and Roxanne, shared a story that when Marilyn was pregnant with me, she pulled into a mall in greater Los Angeles and had the two girls go in to buy her a maternity dress. And these were two girls that were in their preteen years and had just become teenagers and maybe didn't fully understand what a maternity dress was. But she was ashamed, Marilyn was, of how her pregnancy came to be in whatever way it was. And she sat all the children down after that day and said, Mommy has a tumor, and the doctor's going to help her get better and will remove the tumor. And it was really never discussed ever again among the children until they were talking about that story. And one of them said, I think there might be one more of us out there. So the very first time I connected with Noelle, made a phone call and she wasn't available, but her husband answered, Ken, lovely man. And when Noelle got home, Ken said, "You missed a phone call. The tumor is looking for you." It's kind of a joke that we've all since shared, just kind of trying to make funny light of the situation.
And it is amazing, isn't it, how much we can learn about ourselves and how powerful that connection to siblings can be when you never had that. I mean, certainly you grew up with a sister and you have a relationship there, but meeting blood, it's just a very different connection. For those people who just take that for granted and sometimes are annoyed by their siblings more than not, it may be hard to understand, but I was just amazed at the power of that physical, biological connection.
For years, Janet, I would fly to different parts of the country and I would always wonder, who have I interacted with? Who have I walked by? Who have I said something to that maybe I didn't realize who they were? But I couldn't agree more. The first moments and days I had with them in Arizona, just realizing the little things like Noelle and Roxanne can't stand watermelon. I can't stand watermelon. The kind of music that the brothers and Noelle and Sean and Stephen like, I like the same kind of music. So yes, it's amazing to finally feel and say, wow, this is me. These are my people. It's amazing to hold hands and give hugs and just it feels like a little bit more. It just feels a little bit different and that much more special.
Yeah, to see those, like you said, they're little things. They're a gesture, a way you step, things you like, food or colors or taste in things or a sense of humor. The littlest things that other people just take for granted and don't even think about. But when you finally see that as an adult, it's like you've never seen that before and you never felt like you belonged anyplace or you don't know how you came to be. And seeing that just it makes you feel like you belong on earth, that you came from someplace, like you're a part of a clan or something. I don't know. It is the most visceral and powerful explanation for self or things that maybe when you were growing up, you did that were certainly no one else in your family was doing and you thought were weird. And then you find out everyone in my family does that. That's not weird. And, what would it have been like to have grown up being affirmed all the time instead of just feeling like you were just sort of flailing in the wind, kind of?
For years, when I was growing up, I would watch whatever talk show and say the topic that day was an adoption reunion. I was always the first one in tears after school because I wanted that to be me because I knew that they were out there somewhere. I'm at peace with the fact that my mother has passed away and I haven't learned anything about my father. I really wanted to know the siblings. That was The idea that I was the oldest in my adoptive family, but the youngest in the birth family, that was always so cool to me. The idea that I had big sisters, I would lay around before the miracle happened, before the discovery, and just smile and tear up knowing that I had big sisters because I never knew what that was like. And so I really wanted to know what was having big sisters like, and they could give me life advice and wisdom, and even the big brothers, Sean and Steven. So to have all that now, gosh, life has really come full circle for me, and it couldn't have come any sooner than it did. I'll never forget January 23rd, 2011 for the rest of my life.
Well, I know when we first spoke on your show that January of 2011 was when I met my biological father for the first time. I'll never forget that year, that month. But that just that little thing that you said too, like, even though you're in a perfectly fine and happy adoptive home, you literally walk around the world. For me, as young as I can remember, every street, every car, everywhere, I would look at the faces of women and wonder, could you be my mother? And if someone said, well, you know who you look like, I'd think, oh my God, maybe that's a relative. My entire life, I clearly had that awareness of there are people out there that I'm from and I don't know them and I'm separated from them. I'm separate. I'm alone. I'm out here searching for them there. And like every day to look at crowds of people and wonder if there's someone in there that I come from. That's not a great thing for a young person to grow up feeling all the time. And again, without any disrespect and with full gratitude to my adoptive parents, love isn't enough to fill in all of that. That's more about self and identity and this cellular feeling of belonging that we have.
I'm one of those individuals that kind of can pack away and tuck away some of those emotions and just deal with it on my own and in my own way. But yes, there was some emptiness. I mean, I always knew something was missing because of the idea like, had I just been an only child that was placed by maybe a teen mother and whatever, it wouldn't hold the same significance. I would have liked, probably knowing me, to have found her. But the idea that there were all these people, I just felt like I had the right. I wanted to know, and it would complete me. I would learn about me. Even though I knew who I was, I really don't think I knew who I was, if that makes any sense.
Yeah, it makes complete sense to me. There's that, again, that biology of belonging, that understanding, seeing other people who we share characteristics with. There's something primal and fundamental about that. And you kind of need that to put all these pieces of yourself together. And when your grandmother was worried about negative things you might find out about your biological family, there's also that myth that people, when you're born into a family, there's no guarantees and no family is perfect. And in biological families, there's difficult situations. That's not fair to us, I think, to keep information from us because of worry that is not pleasant information. Life isn't pleasant and everyone deals with the hand they're dealt. And I also think it's important to know the good and the bad. I found for myself, learning some of the bad things was sort of a cautionary tale, and they're like, oh, I should watch that impulse in myself. Look at how that can go awry. So there's something to be said for knowing the good and the bad.
All three of my sisters, Janet, my birth sisters, Lisa, Noelle, Roxanne, they all wanted me to know how rough they had it with Marilyn at times, like almost wanted to browbeat it into me. And I had to finally say at one point, I said, I'm so relieved that we're in each other's lives and I love you all unconditionally. But you need to hear from me. It wasn't perfect. My adopted parents divorced in 1985 when I was 12. A mother and two kids moved in with my aunt and uncle who added on to their lake home very graciously. But 6 months after we moved in, their oldest son, living in California, committed suicide. So I said, it hasn't been all roses for me either. I'm sorry about what you went through, that Marilyn would give you nothing but tuna casserole and a spoon of corn syrup for dessert and spend all of her waking money on alcohol and her opera lessons. I'm sorry you went through that. But you have to know that it wasn't all perfect for me either. So we all have stuff. And they all did embrace and accepted that. But I just kept hearing so much about how difficult their lives were with Marilyn. I felt the need to tell them that I didn't have no Hollywood five-star ending myself. I mean, so we all go through it.
Yeah, and I know there's always thought that the adopted home is the better home. But I know with my siblings too, my birth mother was not a great mother. I'm grateful she didn't raise me. But when I wrote my book and my siblings read it, they all said, "Oh my God, we didn't know. We didn't understand what you also went through and what it felt like. You might be grateful you weren't raised by Shirley, but look at what you had to deal with too." So much about adoption is a myth or a Hallmark movie. And I'm so glad that we as adoptees are really telling the truth about what it's like so that hopefully when the situation is necessary in the future, it can be done better. And we aren't silenced by gratitude. Can you tell me what is adoption priorities? And is that, how did you get involved with that?
So, Adoption Priorities, Janet, is a 501c3 nonprofit, and it was founded by a lovely couple, Mitch and Amanda Way. And years ago, they adopted two youngsters from the Ukraine and Russia before adoption internationally was closed by those countries. But they had a real passion for helping mothers that were in, say, crisis pregnancies. And maybe before you make the decision to abort, maybe you could bless a family that is looking to adopt a child. So they opened the 501c3, and I got to know them after I arrived in San Antonio 15 years ago, and I would help them with some of their conventions and events and be a speaker. Toward the end of 2016, they asked me over for dinner one evening and said, "We're getting a little bit older. The kids are graduating high school and college is on the way, and we're thinking about stepping aside to the nonprofit. Do you have any interest in taking the reins?" And I said, well, while I don't have time to facilitate home studies and help with facilitating adoptions, what I do have time to do is maybe support the cause and educate and maybe fundraise and help share stories and just support children and families on both sides. I could do that. So I did take the reins to begin calendar year 2017, and we just support families. We support foster and kinship families and adoptive families going through the process, youngsters that are stuck in the foster child welfare system that need help. We do fundraisers, and my biggest collaborative effort each calendar year is called the Jingle Mart Toy Drive, and it's become one of the biggest toy drives in the state of Texas, and we help out kinship families where, for folks that aren't familiar with kinship, when mom and dad aren't doing the things they should be doing, maybe instead of placing the child in a foster home, place them within the family unit, grandma, grandpa, aunt and uncle, an older sibling. And many times there's a massive financial burden on those situations. So the toy drive is really a cool way to bless those families because you can have a grandmother who has five, six, seven children at 70 years old suddenly under her. And being a sports guy, I work with roughly 30 high school football coaches in San Antonio, Janet, and they're amazing. They put out these collection boxes at each of their high schools, and they collect through their athletic families at the high schools, and all the coaches deliver the toys, and we work with some universities as well and some outside businesses. And then once all the toys and donations are collected, we set up a big shopping center, and it's called Jingle Mart, and it's for kinship caregivers to come in and they get tickets and they get to shop. So it's a real sense of meaning and feeling and joy for these families that might not have a Christmas miracle, but now they suddenly do. We helped roughly 1,500 kids the last couple of years, and then this year was our biggest toy drive effort ever. We had for Christmas 24 roughly 10,000 toys. It's become a pretty well-oiled machine, if you ask me.
I think it's so important to offer any support we can, especially to kinship adoption, because so often it's just that that's needed, the sort of financial, external, material support. And to keep a child in a family so they see themselves in that family unit and that clan is so much more fundamentally important to that child than the size of the roof over their head. So when adoption is based solely on the socioeconomic status of the family, judgments are made that are really not in the best interest of the child. And so to do whatever we can to support families that may struggle to bring in yet another child, but for that child, staying in that family is so much more important than a shiny car in the driveway of a stranger's home where they're being raised.
Adoptions are still going to happen, and it's still a miracle. I'm a big believer in children being blessed and having adoptive homes and maybe parents. My number one piece of advice has always been when adoptive parents, new ones, have asked me, I've always said every time, if they want to find out who they are, support them, help them. They're not going to suddenly run away and leave you. Stay behind them and help them. There's a big push in Texas and hopefully around the country that as much as we can keep kiddos in the biological family unit, let's do that. Like, we don't like it when mom and dad aren't doing good things. when they're involved in things they shouldn't be involved in. Bad choices have consequences. But if we can keep those children in that biological unit and help mom and dad with therapy and get everybody to be a happy, healthy family unit again, let's do that as much as we possibly can instead of having children languish in the foster system. Languishing away in the child welfare system really does nobody any good. It really damages those youngsters and those that age out. There is support, but more often than not, those that age out will probably wind up in the penal system, and that doesn't do us any good at all.
Well, thank you for the work you're doing there. Both your great advice to adoptive parents and also your support for kinship adoptions are both such critical parts of the adoption constellation. What a great person to be in that role. You say so many things that just resonate so much, so deeply with me. And I so appreciate your sharing this story. I know you're working on a memoir. How's that going? And any idea when that might be complete and ready for publication?
So I'm no expert on how to publish. I need to figure out if I'm going to self-publish or find a publisher, but I really believe in, and again, my memoir titled Finding Them. I think it's a beautiful story. It's a long, fascinating journey. Some of the stories that I've shared with you are in the book. But yes, it's done. And I would tell you, I'm having the best time right now because I've written it over a handful of years. I'm just ready to figure out that next step because I want to get it out there and I do want to share because I think it can help and be a good tool.
The title is perfect. Finding Them is wonderful. A much more experienced writer than me said, a book is never finished. It's just abandoned is actually, I guess, a famous quote. And it was funny given the title of my book. But yeah, I think you have to get it to a certain point when you're ready to just let it go and let it go out there. But thank you so much, Vinny. Is there anything else that you'd like to share with our listeners that we haven't touched on today?
I just want to thank you for the opportunity, and it's been wonderful to visit with you, Janet. And again, congratulations on all the successes of your book. And I would just offer, I guess, and share that, be sensitive to those that have been adopted. You can be blessed and loved by an adoptive family, but there is that other aspect out there, and you have a right to know, and you have a right to search. And it's not always going to be a perfect 10 down the middle. There's going to be stuff. So be supportive, be sensitive, and understand that there is trauma involved. There's a lot of emotions involved in a journey like the one I went on. I mean, I was up and down, and is this going to happen? And what's this going to be like? And how can I deal with this? I mean, it's heavy. It's a heavy thing. Just be supportive and sensitive to those of us that have taken journeys like you and I have.
Very good advice. Thank you. And where can people find you online?
Well, you can find me on, anywhere, Instagram, Twitter, Facebook, kens5.com. So probably if you just typed in the Google column there, Vinnie Vinzetta, Vinnie, and then Vinzetta, you're going to find some links and you can find me easily on social media. I'm active. I'm out there.
Good. Well, thank you so much, Vinny. It's been really interesting. I can't wait to read your book. And thank you so much for sharing so much of your story. Really very powerful and poignant, and I really appreciate it.
Thank you for the opportunity, Janet.
Thanks for watching Voices of Adoption. I'm your host, Janet Sherland. You can find me online at abandonedatbirthbook.com and on Instagram at Janet Sherland Official. My book, Abandoned at Birth, is available through Amazon, Barnes & Noble, Books A Million, and bookshop.org. Again, thanks for being with us.